The sound of a single, soft ping from a laptop at 3 a.m. usually signifies nothing more than a stray notification. But for Sarah Miller, it was the sound of her life being erased in real time. She sat in the blue glow of her study, watching as the progress bars on her screen ticked toward zero, one account after another vanishing into the digital void. Her daughter, Emily, stood in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the hallway light, watching the final transfer complete with an expressionless gaze that chilled Sarah to the bone. When the last window closed and the screen turned black, Emily whispered that everything was locked and that Sarah was finally alone. Sarah didn't scream, she didn't beg, and she didn't fight back. She simply turned her chair, looked her daughter in the eye, and whispered for words that made the color drain from Emily's face, leaving her trembling in the sudden silence of the house. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The story of the Miller family was once the envy of their affluent neighborhood in suburban Connecticut, defined by success, prestige, and a bond that appeared unbreakable to the outside world. Sarah had spent 20 years building a legacy in private equity, while Emily had followed in her footsteps, graduating at the top of her class with a keen mind for the same complex systems her mother mastered. They were a team, a powerhouse duo who handled investments, properties, and legal affairs with a synchronized efficiency that left little room for error. Yet, beneath the polished surface of their dinner table conversations, a divide had been growing for months, rooted in a series of discrepancies that only Sarah had fully mapped out. The tension began to show in the small, almost invisible fractures of their daily routine, where casual remarks held weight far beyond their words. Sarah started noticing that funds were moving in ways that didn't align with their long-term strategy, and emails meant for her eyes alone were being intercepted or redirected before she ever saw them. She kept her suspicions quiet, observing Emily with the same analytical gaze she once used to assess corporate acquisitions, waiting to see how far the deception would go. Emily played the role of the devoted daughter perfectly, bringing coffee to the study and discussing future projects with a warmth that now felt like a carefully constructed mask. Sarah realized that the person sitting across from her was no longer the girl she raised, but a stranger who had been studying her moves to ensure a total checkmate. On that night, the air in the house was heavy with the weight of things left unsaid for far too long. When Emily finally made her move, thinking she had successfully severed Sarah from her resources, she believed she was in total control of the outcome. She had spent months preparing the exit, ensuring that every firewall was reinforced and every recovery key was in her own possession, convinced that her mother was too old to understand the speed of modern digital warfare. As Sarah watched the accounts disappear, she felt a strange sense of clarity, knowing that the trap had been fully sprung and the evidence was now exactly where she needed it to be. She had spent the last 3 years building a parallel system of surveillance, a digital bunker that recorded every keystroke, every login, and every illicit transaction that Emily had initiated from her own devices. When Sarah delivered her reply, it wasn't a threat of physical harm or a mother's emotional plea, but a cold, clinical recitation of the digital breadcrumbs Emily had unknowingly left behind. She detailed the exact time Emily had bypassed the security protocols, the specific offshore accounts she had opened under an alias, and the IP addresses that traced her movements to a group of outside contractors. The color vanished from Emily's face because she realized in that moment that she hadn't just locked her mother out. She had locked herself into a digital paper trail that led directly to federal authorities. Sarah explained that she had known about the plan since the first unauthorized transfer 3 months ago, but she had waited for this exact moment to ensure that the recovery of the assets would be accompanied by a full confession. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal filings and investigations that dismantled the life Emily had carefully curated for herself. She had reached out to partners she thought were allies, only to find that they were as compromised as she was, each one turning on the others as the federal net tightened around their activities. Sarah watched from the sidelines as the empire they once shared was picked apart by investigators, the documents revealing a depth of betrayal that went far beyond mere greed. It turned out that Emily had been coerced by a sophisticated group of cybercriminals who had identified her vulnerabilities and used them to gain access to the family fortune. They had convinced her that Sarah was the one stealing from her, using her own insecurities against her in a classic psychological maneuver designed to pit family members against one another. As the investigation proceeded, it became clear that the daughter was as much a victim of manipulation as she was the perpetrator of the crime. She had been fed a steady diet of misinformation, designed to make her feel like an underdog reclaiming what was rightfully hers, while the real architects of the scheme watched from behind layers of encrypted anonymity. Sarah felt a profound sense of sorrow as the truth surfaced in the courtroom, realizing that the house of cards had fallen not because of her own actions, but because of the external forces that had preyed upon the very bond she had once held most dear. The trial was a public spectacle, drawing attention to the dangers of digital isolation and the ease with which a life can be dismantled when trust is weaponized by those who know how to exploit it. In the final days before the verdict, Sarah found herself reflecting on the nature of justice and the cost of the security she had so carefully maintained. She had saved her assets and preserved her legacy, but the relationship with her daughter remained shattered, a casualty of a battle she had technically won but felt she had ultimately lost. She looked back at the months of silence and the cold calculations that had brought them to this point, wondering if there was ever a moment where a different choice could have changed the trajectory of their downfall. The question lingered in the air long after the lawyers had packed their briefcases and the news crews had moved on to the next sensational story, leaving Sarah alone in the same study where it all began. Ultimately, the case serves as a warning about the fragility of our digital lives and the ease with which we can become strangers to those closest to us. It highlights how quickly the tools meant to protect us can be turned against us when we stop communicating and start calculating. Sarah eventually moved on, but she never stopped checking the logs, never stopped monitoring the connections, and never again trusted the silence of a house at 3 a.m. Her story remains a testament to the fact that while we can lock our accounts and guard our assets, the most dangerous breaches often start within the walls of our own homes. The final question left for everyone watching is simple. If you were in Sarah's position, would you have prioritized the truth over the preservation of the family name? And at what point does the pursuit of justice become a permanent barrier to reconciliation?